Do things. We, as we learn for ourselves, we make things happen. One of the elements that we take for granted in our world is cause and effect. Sometimes we make things happen. Or sometimes one thing makes something else happen. Take a raw egg and put it in boiling water, it comes out hard boiled. Or the wind blows the snow off the mountain cap and there's an avalanche. Cause and effect is part of our everyday world, part of our experience that we take for granted. Another thing we take for granted is the permanence of the items in our world. We're all sitting in a room in which there's a number of tables. Most of us have been here for at least 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and the tables just sit there. Yes, we could, if we desired, annihilate them, but no one has. And in the meantime, they just sit there. Same is true with the stones, same is true with us. Items just sit there. They continue to exist all on their own. This is what we take for granted. The picture that I'm going to describe to you says that none of this is really correct. It's really all an illusion. It's a deep illusion. Rabbi Doktor's way of describing the picture is this. You know what a video really is. A video really is a sequence of pictures. Each picture is a still picture, a frame, and the frames follow one another so rapidly that psychologically you assimilate it into a continuous stream of events. You're sitting in a theater and seeing a picture of a football game, and you see that on the left side of the screen someone picks up the ball and throws. Now watch how we talk. Throws it to the right-hand side of the screen. Somebody catches it. So you'd say, but of course that's silly. There's no it that's being thrown from one end to the other. There's no it that really travels across the screen. What you really have is 500 pictures. The first picture has the ball at the left end of the screen. The next picture has the ball a half an inch away from the left end of the screen. And the next picture has the ball an inch away, another half inch. And the pictures pass by so quickly that your eye and your brain together integrated into the experience of a single thing traveling across the screen. Now, because you're all technologically aware, you know that it's just an illusion. No one's fooled by it. We just take it for granted. We look at it. It's true. We experience it as if it were one thing traveling across, but we know it isn't true. Says with Dessler, the same exact reality applies to our three-dimensional, everyday world, not in the movie theater. The world is being recreated moment by moment. Recreated from scratch. A brand new creation moment by moment. This table, which we think of, which we experience as sitting there, the same table sitting there the whole time, that's really an illusion. It's a recreation of a new table, moment by moment. It's just that the recreation takes place so rapidly, and the tables that are created are so similar that our minds integrate it into a single table, just as we do for the pictures on the screen. But just as in the case of the pictures on the screen, it's not literally true that there's one thing that continues through time or moves across the screen from left to right. So too, it's not literally true that there's one table that sits here and remains, persists, exists. Rather, there's a new table being created moment by moment. It's just that it's so similar that our mind integrates it into one. Similarly, if you take an object, a ball, and hold it above the floor and release it, and we see it fall to the ground, When we say it falls to the ground, says Rav Dester, those words are just as literally incorrect as saying that the football traveled from the left of the screen to the right of the screen. On the screen we know it's separate pictures. With the ball dropping from my hand, it's also separate creations. One creation 1/10 of an inch from my hand, next creation 1/5 of an inch from my hand. Separate creations, very close to one another, until the ball is created, hitting the floor. Psychologically, we are prone to integrate it into a single thing, the history of a single thing. That's because our psychology is built that way. But in truth, it isn't that way. Every moment is a brand new creation. This is what we mean when we say in the morning, in Shachris, in the morning prayers, twice, that God is Mechadesh, Ma'aseh Bereshis. God makes anew the work of creation, Tomid, continuously. He makes it anew continuously. Those words are taken literally. He's making it new all the time, moment by moment. So, the experience of permanence, that things are permanent and remain, is simply an illusion. So are cause and effect an illusion. It's a little bit deeper. Why are cause and effect an illusion? Let's take a very simple case where a person kicks a stone. So he says, I made the stone move. Look, I moved my foot came in contact with the stone, and as a result of the impact of my foot on the stone moved. That's the way we experience it. That's the way it feels. But now let's reflect. That foot moving, every moment is a brand new creation. So, the foot coming in contact with the stone is one creation. The stone starting to move is another separate creation. The stone accelerating, picking up speed, is another creation. The stone further away from the foot is another creation. These are all separate creations. There can't be cause and effect across separate creations. Any more than in the film, you could say, well, you know why the picture of the ball is in the middle of the screen? Because 10 seconds ago, there was a picture of the person throwing the ball. And because there was a picture of the person throwing the ball, that caused a picture of the ball in the middle of the screen. That's ridiculous. Each picture is a separate picture. It's a brand new, totally, whole, complete picture. If there's anything that's causing anything in the film, it's the editor. The editor chooses which pictures to put in what order. He's the one who puts them in the order that they have. But there's no real relationship between one picture and the next picture, except similarity. No picture makes the next picture be what it is. The next picture is there because the editor chose to put it in. I lived through, and my cousin Dr. Corman lived through a time when they used, briefly, subliminal advertising. You'd be watching a picture of cowboys of the Old West, and then all of a sudden everybody would get very thirsty. They would all get up and go and get a Coke. That's because they put in one frame that said, get a Coke. Now, one frame out of 18 per second or 24 per second, you can't consciously register it. But it was picked up subconsciously, and everybody got thirsty. They missed that part of the film. They went out and got a Coke. The editor decided, for the sake of making money from Coca-Cola, to stick in that frame. The frames are totally separate from one another. No frame has an effect on any other frame. They're all separate pictures. So according to this picture that Rav Dester paints for us, our world is like that motion picture. And that means the state of the world at one moment has no effect whatsoever on the state of the world at the next moment. They're separate creations. That means there's no real cause and effect. I cannot say the reason why the ball fell to the floor, or the reason why the stone moved because I kicked it, because I released it. That's not what made it happen. Because each moment is a completely separate creation. So the permanence of the objects in our world is an illusion, and cause and effect is an illusion. Well, let's try to flesh out this idea in religious terms I want to make a few points, and as I said, I'll stop for discussion, and then we'll move to the more philosophical. Does this mean that God is fooling us? As one eminent philosopher, who's quite an excellent philosopher in other areas, he just ventured into an area which is totally ignorant, said, does this commit us to the jokester God? God is a jokester, plays jokes on us. He makes it look one way. It certainly looks like things are permanent. It certainly looks like there's cause and effect. He just makes it look that way. He enjoys fooling us, sort of making fun of us, treating us in our primitive simplicity. That's a mistake. Okay, time for a short quiz. Why is that a mistake? Why is it a mistake to say that if he creates the world looking permanent and looking like there's cause and effect, but it isn't really true, it isn't true that there's any permanence, it isn't true that there's cause and effect, why is it wrong to conclude that God is fooling us? I gave you the answer already.
Because he wants us to see it as it's all one picture.
Well, okay, but isn't it true then the way he wants us to see it is not correct? So isn't he fooling us? Okay, you're right. I put a little too much in. You're right. I made it. I made it too political. He is deliberately causing us to believe something false. I don't mean that he's playing a trick with us or he's treating us as primitive. I just meant that as a joke. I see. I shouldn't have done it. I was taking it too seriously. What's wrong with that description? Well, he told us the truth, didn't he? Don't we say it twice every morning? He told us the truth. It can't be that he's fooling us, tricking us. It can't be that he's feeding us a false picture so we'll end up with false beliefs if he tells us the truth. What we have here is a kind of split strategy. He creates the world in such a way that the human being, with his observation and intelligence, cannot discover what it really is. With your observation and intelligence, you cannot discover this. No scientist will tell you that the world is recreated moment by moment. But he does not leave us to wallow in ignorance and superstition. He tells us the truth. He tells us, I created the world in such a way that you can't see the truth, but I want you to know what the truth is. And since I want you to know what the truth is, I'm telling you what the truth is. That I'm creating it moment by moment. So one should not take this as God's fooling us. Of course, if we'll imagine a person who says, I only trust my eyes and my intelligence. I don't think about anything else. I don't recognize anything else. I'm not interested in what God said. I only follow my own eyes and intelligence. Then he will be fooled. That's true. But then it's not God that's fooling him. He's fooling himself. He's deliberately ignoring the most important evidence. The evidence of what the creator of the universe told us is going on. That's his fault, not God's fault. So yes, God creates the world in such a way that we can't discover on our own its true character. But no, he isn't fooling us. He's told us the truth of the matter. So we will know it and understand it. Now, should we say, well, if there isn't really cause and effect, if everything's a brand new creation, then things could develop in any old way. There's no control. There's no necessity. Okay, we put the raw egg in the boiling water, and 5 minutes later it comes out hard-boiled. But there's no reason why it shouldn't come out soft-boiled, or raw, or a turkey, or a lump of gold, or anything else. Since there's no real cause and effect, nothing really makes anything else happen. So then, strictly speaking, just like the vicious editor of the film sticks in, go get a Coke, in the middle of the scene of the cowboys, so God can stick in any frame he wants. He can create anything he wants at any moment. Should we trust cause and effect? Is there any point in doing science? Is there any point in learning about what seems to be cause and effect, since there isn't any real necessity there? Nothing in one state of the world at one moment makes the next moment happen in any way, shape, or form. The answer is no. It's not a waste of time. And yes, it is worthwhile in investing in understanding the world scientifically, because Science is the description of the illusion that God is creating. And we know that God is committed to that illusion, because that illusion operates almost all the time. So we really will know what's going to happen. We really can predict what's going to happen, because God is committed to making the world operate according to those categories, even though there's no real cause and effect. So let's say I take the raw egg and I'm thinking, shall I put it into the boiling water or not? Gosh, anything could happen. Since God is running the world and He's making it anew moment by moment, I could put it in and it could sink to the bottom like a piece of lead, or it could explode, or anything could happen. It's true, anything could happen. But we know from experience that almost always it becomes hard-boiled in 5 minutes. Why is that? If anything could happen, how come the same thing happens over and over and over again? The answer is because God is committed to making the same thing happen over and over and over again. If I know that He's committed to making it happen over and over again, then I can rely on that, if I want a hard-boiled egg, to put it into the boiling water. Why? Because God has shown me that He operates, He causes these patterns to repeat over and over again, and I'll get a hard-boiled egg at the end. Not because I'm making it happen, not because I'm controlling it, but because He's committed to making those patterns repeat. So there's no reason why one shouldn't invest in analyzing the world and understanding it scientifically. One will gain real ability to predict what the world will do, because God is committed to repeating the patterns that we discover. What we won't get, this is a specialist point, what we won't get is a true explanation as to why it happens. That we won't get. But to know what to expect under what conditions, yes, because God is committed to recreating the world that way over and over. The third point, in terms of the religious understanding of the idea, I'm inclined to think that there's an exception to this rule. Tables. The illusion of permanence is only an illusion. They're recreated moment by moment. Cows. Puffs of smoke. Galaxies. Quarks. They're all created moment by moment, and the permanence that they seem to have is only an illusion. What about the human soul? What about the human soul? Is it too being created every moment anew? I think if we try to apply this picture to the human soul, we're going to have trouble. The reason we're going to have trouble is because of reward and punishment. I think it's obvious that reward and punishment only apply to the one who performed the actions, not to somebody else. Especially punishment. It would be grossly unjust if A performs an action, a crime, and B is punished for it. Now if you imagine the soul being recreated moment by moment, a brand new creation moment by moment, just as we said about the table. So the soul that exists now is not the same soul that existed 5 minutes ago, or an hour ago, or 10 hours ago, or a year ago. Now imagine that someone commits a crime, and then he's captured, he's accused of the crime, he wants to be punished for the crime. If I look at it as a brand new creation every moment, it's not the same person as the one who committed the crime. It's somebody else. Okay, he looks very similar, that's true. That's because God created a new one looking very much like the old one. If I say that the table is a brand new table every moment, and I apply that to the soul, then it's a brand new soul. It would be unjust to punish this soul for what some other soul, similar as you like, did. This soul didn't do it. So I think morally, we had better make the soul an exception to the rule. Tables are created anew moment by moment. And squirrels are created anew moment by moment. And angels are created anew moment by moment. Okay, angels have tricky subjects. I'm not going into that in detail. Maybe the human body can be created anew moment by moment, but not the soul. The soul has to be an exception to the rule. The soul has to be really permanent, created once and permanent. I haven't seen this exception described explicitly anywhere. If that's so far as I know, does not describe it explicitly this way. But there is a phrase in our literature, in our tradition, which I think lends support to this idea. And I've asked people whom I respect about this idea, and they do agree with me that we should say this. The soul is described in our literature as chelek Eloka mimal, a piece of God on high. Now, I hope we understand one another. You can't slice up God. These are one of those words that you cannot take literally. Chelek Eloka, a piece of God, slice off a piece. It means something more abstract than that. What it means is that the soul has some essential godlike qualities. The soul has some essential godlike qualities. Well, God is a creator. Tables and squirrels are creatures that are created moment by moment. The soul stands in between. The soul is a creature also, but it isn't created moment by moment, brand new, moment like tables and squirrels. No, it's created once, and then it has real permanence. It has real permanence, similar to imitating God's permanence. Not exactly the same, because God is creator and it is created, but more similar to God than anything else in the creation. It has real permanence, real identity over time. Other things don't have that. That's why when a person performs an action, later on he can be rewarded or blamed and punished for the action, because it really is the same soul. This is how the picture looks in a religious context. Questions up to here. Yeah.
Is there anything that might lend itself to all the spiritual world being maintained, whereas only the soul?
Well, I must say, the only thing that I know that led me to this exception is the moral question. Why it's unjust to punish. Anything else that's not rewarded and punished, as I can see, should be able to be created anew moment by moment. Spiritual things are created. They're just as created as tables are. They're just a different kind of thing. But they are creatures. And why they shouldn't be brand new every moment, I can just say, I can only plead my own ignorance. I don't know. I don't know any reason why they shouldn't be subject to Rav Dester's rule. I'm going out on a limb. I'm saying Rav Dester's rule has an exception. He doesn't say this. I assume he would agree to it if he were asked. That's my free assumption. The more exceptions you have, the weaker your position becomes. Right? So I'd rather limit the exceptions as much as I can. Yeah.
There are several times when angels seem to have permanence. God apparently will shecht the Yetzer Hara when Mashiach comes. So why not just stop creating the Yetzer Hara?
Okay, so I said, that's what I meant when I said that there's a specialist point here about angels, whether angels to some extent have free will and they're responsible in some limited way for what they do. If they do have that responsibility, and there are sources which indicate that, like the one that you're remarking on, then indeed, according to my understanding, I would have to say that they too are not recreated. Now, if they're not recreated, if they're permanent and they perform actions, why shouldn't they be held to account for their actions? That's the whole point of free will. To be responsible and to be able to be held to account for what you do. So there's no reason to just simply stop creating them. Justice requires that they be treated according to the way that they deserve. Yeah.
Can you say what's the difference between the everyday continuous moment-to-moment creation and the original 6 days?
Yes, that's a very important question. If this is true, that every moment is a brand new creation, what does it mean that God stopped creating after 6 days? The answer is that during the 6 days, God brought into existence new categories of things. Each day there were new categories of things that didn't exist before. From then on, there have been no new categories of things. There There have been new items in all the same categories. That's the difference between the 6 days and the time period thereafter. That's very important. Yeah.
You really already answered this, but why did he make it look as if there's order independent of some editor who's creating it behind the scenes? In other words, yeah, we won't be fooled if we listen to him. Why did he make it so that if we only trust our intelligence and senses, that we would be fooled?
Okay, this is also an important question, and I didn't answer it, and I'm glad you asked it. There are many answers to the question, but the simplest answer is that if we saw his creation moment by moment, we wouldn't have free will. He would be so open, so obvious. We would experience his presence, which is utterly different from just knowing it. We would experience his presence and we would be overwhelmed with it and we wouldn't have free will. Here's a very homely example of what I mean. You tell your 8-year-old, don't take cookies from the cookie jar. Then you put the cookie jar on the table and you draw your chair up to the table and you sit and you watch the cookie jar. Is he going to take cookies? Probably not. Is he going to grow, develop, mature, learn to take responsibility? Probably not. What you have to do is tell him, don't take cookies from the cookie jar, and then leave the house. Leave him alone with the cookie jar for 2 hours. And then he'll struggle. And if he succeeds in withstanding temptation, then he will have developed morally. And if he fails in withstanding temptation, and you come home and discover it, he will also grow morally by the way that you react to him. So either way, he will learn to develop a sense of responsibility, which he could not do if you were sitting there watching the cookie jar. Now, God tells us that there are things that should be done and things that should not be done. He has to give us the freedom to act on our own. The only way we can have the freedom to act on our own is if he hides. The way he hides is by creating a world that looks like it runs on its own. The world looks like it's independent. The world looks like it's self-sustaining. The two features that I mentioned, that items continue to exist all on their own, they don't need to be supported, and cause and effect means what happens now is because of what happened before, and that will determine what will happen a moment from now. That makes it look like the things that exist in the world and the events that happen in the world are all self-contained. The world carries itself. When it looks that way, then God's presence is hidden enough for me to make free, independent decisions. Of course, if I didn't know that it was an illusion, if I didn't know that he was present and accounting for everything that takes place, then I wouldn't know the alternative that I'm supposed to choose. But no, he told me, but he doesn't make me see it. There's a gigantic difference between what you know and what you see. I hope that Dr. Corman will hear me out. When you tell a person about his medical condition, tell him words, it often has no effect on his behavior. If you show him an x-ray, his lungs, he sees the black in his lungs, that has a shocking effect on the person that the words don't have. Why? He can't read an x-ray, all he sees is black. So he hears that his lung is shot. It has no more informational content than the words, but he sees it. Seeing has a much bigger impact on a person than just hearing words, even when you completely believe the words. Here, God says, I don't want you to see it. If you see it, you're going to be overwhelmed. You won't be able to make independent choices. I'll tell you, so you'll know. You'll know what the reality is, and you'll know what you should choose. But I'm not going to let you see it. So as part of his policy of hiding his agency by giving the world this appearance of independence. There are other reasons for it, but that's the easiest reason.
So are independent agencies taken away when, for example, Revelation and Sinai happen?
Oh, so now, yes, in the context of prophecy, for example, this holds for every prophet except Moses. When a person had prophecy, he was flattened by it. He couldn't stand up. He lost control of his mind, of his senses, of his will. He was totally overwhelmed by prophecy. The minute the prophecy was over, he was restored to his freedom. The perfect example of this is Jonah. God says to Jonah, go to Nineveh And Jonah says, no thank you, I'm going to Tarshish. Right? That's because the prophecy ended. The prophecy stopped, and then he took off in a different direction. While he has prophecy, he has no control. The minute the prophecy is gone, the minute he's not experiencing it, so then free will is restored. So that's the gigantic difference between experiencing something on the one hand and just knowing it intellectually on the other hand. Okay? Now, the natural response to hearing this is, you've got to be kidding. Why should anybody think that? That there's no permanence to the world? That there's no cause and effect? I mean, I live this. I see this. I feel this. It's just, it's something which everybody takes for granted. How could you possibly take seriously the idea that it's all an illusion? That those who have a religious point of view, God says so, that's enough of a reason. But I want to share with you a little bit of philosophical point of view on this subject. David Hume is famous for saying something like this, something very close to this. It's one of his great skeptical arguments against causation, and in his picture of his experience of the world, each moment brings with it its own experiences, and every moment is disconnected from every other moment. And since he introduced these ideas, it's become a permanent strain in philosophy. There are many who disagree, but no one has conclusively shown that he's wrong, and there are those who agree with him. Rav Desta describes this in an essay called Nes V'Teva, Miracle in Nature, and the Strive for Truth, which I strongly commend to your attention. Rav Desta puts the discussion this way. It's really Hume's idea. I don't know whether Rav Desta had contact with Hume, or son told me that perhaps some of his students had read Hume and shared these ideas with him, but the argument is almost identical, though it's skeletal. It's not the whole flesh of Hume's argument, but it has the same structure. Says Rav Desta, let's ask someone, what makes grass grow? So he'll tell us, gosh, Rabbi, everybody knows that. Look, you take the seeds and you put them in the ground in the spring, and you do it at a time when the temperature's right. You make sure it gets enough water, it gets sunlight, and it grows. So Desta says, I see what you're telling me, but I don't think you answered my question. You told me when grass grows. You didn't tell me what makes grass grow. You told me under what conditions I can expect the grass to grow. Temperature, water, sunlight. Correct. I agree with you. My experience agrees with yours. When you put the seeds in the ground in the spring and you water it, it gets enough sunlight, then it grows. Those are the conditions under which, by experience, I see that it in fact does grow. But I asked you what makes it grow. What causes it to grow? What forces it to grow? What pushes it to grow? Not just when, in fact, does it grow. It's sort of like asking, what makes Big Ben chime? And the answer is, every hour on the hour it chimes. Well, yes it does, every hour on the hour. That doesn't tell me what makes it chime. That just tells me when it chimes. I didn't ask you when it chimes. I asked you what makes it chime. That's not an answer to the right. It's not the right answer to the question. It's not answering the question at all. Now, the next move is to be told, well, Rabbi, you know, up until a couple hundred years ago, people really didn't have an answer to that question, because they didn't have microscopes. They didn't know that living bodies are made out of cells. They didn't know how cells operate. But now we know what makes it grow. Listen. There are little capillaries, and there's transpiration which raises the water, and the cell walls have selective ability to absorb various substances, can absorb and can expel, and there is intracellular structures that manipulate the molecules that come in, and when you put it in a moist soil, then when you do that, moisture and elements from the soil are absorbed, and then when they reach the cell wall, they're absorbed, and when they're absorbed, then they interact with other molecules, and then new molecules are formed, and then when that happens, the cells divide, and then you get new cells and a bigger blade of grass. I hope you heard the word that I said over and over again. When? When this happens, and when this happens, and when this happens, that happens. Right. Okay. Gotcha. So now, what have you given me? You've given me lots and lots of extra information about when it happens. But you haven't told me what makes it happen. Sure, before I didn't know about cells. I just knew you put it in the water. Now you know. Now I know a lot of intermediary steps. When you put it in the water, there's transpiration that raises it up, and the molecules interact. But all you've told me that when this happens, that happens. When that happens, that happens. When that happens, that happens. You haven't told me anything about what makes it happen. So then you go down the scientific track. And what's important to see is that every step in this progress, you still get the wrong type of answer. You get more whens and no what makes. But Rabbi, they're all made of molecules. And when this molecule encounters that molecule, there's an exchange, a chemical exchange, and then it either absorbs energy or gives off energy, and it's a product of the molecular of the chemical process. That's more when. Or the molecules are made of atoms, and when atoms of this type interact with atoms of that type, then there are these exchanges and those exchanges. It's more when. Well, but Rabbi, there are particles, you know. Electrons repel one another, and protons repel one another, and electrons attract protons, and you know, like charges and unlike charges. That means when you try to push two electrons together, it gets harder and harder. When you try to push two protons together, it gets harder and harder. When you try to push two neutrons together, it's no problem. And when you try to pull proton electron apart, it gets harder and harder. I mean, isn't that more when? No matter how far down you go, you're just getting more when. You're getting more pieces, but you're not getting the what makes it happen. Says Rabbi Dessler, you can analyze it all the way down to the bottom. Science never even begins to answer this question, what makes it happen? All science does is gives you more information about under what conditions it happens. I'll give you another example, though this one's harder to press, but for the sake of perhaps rounding out the idea. You see a clock, and the hands are going around. And say, well, what makes it do that? So let's open it up. You open it up and you see inside that there are lights. Red lights, green lights, blue lights, little lights. And they're flashing off and on in patterns. You watch it for a while and say, look at that. When the majority of lights are red, and they flash red, then the second hand ticks. Each time the majority of lights flash red, goes another tick. So that's it, you see? It's the red lights that determine the tick of the second hand. What would we say? Well, that may be a symptom, all right. If you observe it, you'll see that when the red lights flash, the second hand ticks. But I want to know what makes it go. The red lights aren't making it go. They may be aligned. They may be coordinated in time, but I'm making it go. Nothing in the light waves that makes it go. Okay, quite right. I say, oh, look what we've discovered. Take off another layer. Underneath there's a spring. And the spring is connected to a lever. And the lever has a catch. And when the spring forces open, so then the catch rises, and the hand goes to the next notch. And then the catch stops, flops down. Then the spring pushes it open again, and then it flops down. That's what's making it happen. Here it sounds more convincing. It's a spring pushing against the hand. There's a lever that goes up. It skips. The lever falls down, and then it goes up over again. But Rav Dessler and Hume will press the same argument. Well, but then what are you appealing to? You're appealing to when I push, the thing resists. And when I push hard enough, I can overcome the resistance. And what is that? That's just whenever I push, I feel a resistance. And whenever I push hard enough, I overcome the resistance. It's more when. It's just that this when is so universal in your experience, you take it for granted. But it's more when. It's not what makes it happen. Indeed, take two billiard balls. This was Hume's favorite example because he was addicted to billiards. You shoot one billiard ball at the other and hits the other one and makes the other one moves. So you say, well, you know what made it move? Impact. Now, if you take two little balls of mercury on a very smooth surface and roll one ball of mercury to the second ball of mercury, you know what will happen? When they touch, they'll coalesce. It will not ricochet and it won't move at all. They'll just coalesce into one ball. Mercury doesn't do what solid billiard balls do. I mean, two droplets of water, same thing will happen. They'll coalesce. Second droplet doesn't bounce off the first droplet. So what's the difference between water, mercury, and billiard balls? Your experience, that's all. You've had a lot of experience with billiard balls, and you see that when one billiard ball hits another billiard ball, it moves away. And those who've had a little more specialized experience know that when one drop of water hits another drop of water, they coalesce. And when one ball of mercury hits another ball of mercury, they coalesce. It's just your experience. When these things interact, you get that result. And when those things interact, you get that result. More than that, you don't get. Our whole picture of the world is a picture of when. Under these conditions, those things happen. Never do we get an answer to what makes it happen. These simple reflections are used to undermine the idea of cause and effect. When we say cause and effect, intuitively think, this happened, so that's got to happen. It has to happen. It's being forced to happen. It has no choice. There's no way out. All of that intuition, all of that strong feeling, according to Hume, Rav Dessler, have no basis in logic. All we know is, in all of our experience, when these things interact, we get this result. When those things interact, we get those results. But to say that it couldn't be any other way, it couldn't be, it's impossible to be, we have no reason for that. All we know is that that's the way it usually happens. If that's all there is, then it changes our picture of what the world really is drastically. Now, the picture I gave you from Dessler at the beginning of the hour becomes very natural. So there isn't any real continuity. There isn't any real connection. It isn't as if shooting the cue ball at the 8 ball at that angle made the 8 ball go into the side pocket. No. It's just that shooting the cue ball at the 8 ball at that angle, in my experience, that's what happens. That's what happened under these conditions. Not that it made it happen that way. Then the religious picture that's being recreated moment by moment is very natural. It's very natural from this philosophical point of view. And now, my final point, now our attitude towards miracles should be very, very different. Because many people have a visceral resistance to miracles. Miracles violate the laws of nature, so they're impossible. Well, according to this picture, there aren't any real laws of nature. There's no law of nature that makes things happen. Indeed, from all we can tell, from all we can understand, we don't know of anything that makes things happen. Things just happen. And they happen in certain patterns. And we get used to those patterns, and we are accustomed to them, and we confidently predict that they will continue to follow the patterns. But we have no understanding of one thing. Forcing another thing to happen, Hume's term for was necessary connection, spelled with an X. Connection, that is, spelled with an X. We have no concept of that. So that being the case, a miracle now will simply be an event that doesn't follow the patterns. Any reason to oppose miracles on principle? No, I can't believe in miracles. They violate the laws of nature. They're just simply impossible. Why are they impossible? Impossible? Things are just happening. They're just happening and happening in certain categories. Happening with certain repetitive nature. And this one didn't follow those categories. This one didn't follow those repetitions. There's a reason to be opposed in principle and say that it couldn't be? Why couldn't it be? If you believe that cause and effect was real, if you believe that when this happens, it forces that to happen, that's another story. If A really forces B to happen, once A happens, it sounds hard to understand or to accept the idea that B didn't happen. If A really forces B to happen, but if A and B are just associated in experience, whenever we've tried A, we've gotten B. Someone to say, on this occasion there was an exception. Okay, so this time it didn't work. usually works, but doesn't have to always work. Our attitude towards miracles becomes a much looser, much more open-minded, I would say, much more balanced attitude. If you have good reason to believe that a miracle took place, then you can accept it. You don't have to oppose it in principle that such a thing couldn't happen. Questions up to here? Yeah.
So there seems to be a cause and effect maybe in terms of your soul. That's more information.
Say again?
Is there a cause and effect in relation to the human soul?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Let's take it step by step. Is there a cause and effect relationship between the soul and the world, and the physical world, or the soul and the body? The answer to that will be no. What happens is similar to what I said, only now it operates on a psychological level. I know from experience that when I decide to lift my arm, it goes up. Almost always. Almost always. You can catch a cramp in your muscle, and then it won't go up. But almost always, when I decide to raise my arm goes up. That's just as, it falls in the same category as putting the raw egg into the hot water and having it come out hard-boiled, or watching the billiard balls and you see one billiard ball touch another one and the other one go off, rather than what happens to water or to mercury. I noticed that my psychology and my body are related by this pattern. That when I decide that my arm should go up, it goes up. Not because I'm making it go up. I just noticed that when I decide it should go up, it goes up. Right? So there will not be real causation. There'll just be patterns that I get used to through experience. Indeed, by the way, when you have children, you will notice very young children spend a good amount of time experimenting. The child wants to imitate you. You make a sound. The child will flail its arms, or flail its feet, or twist his head, or open and close its eyes. How do you get that to work? I want to smile. Now, what makes it do? Does this do it? No, it didn't do it. Doggone it. What about that? That doesn't do it? Let's try something else. He's sort of trying to figure out what'll get the effect. He doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know which muscles will produce the effect that he wants. He grasps for something for a while. He can't get it. It's here, and he grasps over here, and he grasps over here, and he misses until he learns how to get it. He's practicing what is it that when he thinks it will make it happen. Right? And then he learns and he takes it for granted. And indeed, it goes on throughout life that way. When you will learn a foreign language and try to pronounce the words in a local accent, you won't know how to do it. And you'll try. You try with this the mouth and the tongue this way, and should it be nasal or shouldn't it be nasal, until you figure out how to make it sound the way they sound, right? Or new coordination, and learn to ride a bicycle or a unicycle or any new thing. You'll be testing with your muscles, which muscles do it right, which muscles can I get this result out of. You yourself won't know until you try and see what kinds of decisions bring about the right effect.
And what about in terms of human soul with maybe a spiritual worlds, like a merit or a mera or a good deed and a bad deed?
Well, you mean doing them or receiving a reward or punishment for them?
Like a spiritual reward. Is that when you say it's
Well, that's an interaction with God. That's an interaction with God. Yes, I was waiting for somebody to raise this. According to the picture I'm giving you, there is real causation vis-a-vis God. But there, I think it's not so much causation as it is creation. This bothered me for a while, but I think this is the answer to it. It's not that you have A here and B here, and A makes B do something. That's a picture that we can't support. According to Hume and Rav Desta, we have no concept of what we're saying when we say that. But if God creates something that didn't exist without Him, and He creates it moment by moment, then what it does is due to Him because He's making it be. Not just pushing it around. He's making it be. That's a different concept. I'm not saying we understand that either, but it's a different concept from ordinary causation.
He interprets as He renews daily, perpetually the work of creation. Now, if we think of the work of creation being creating of life, that's what Hashem created in the 6th day, besides the luminary bodies, created life. Why should we project that into inanimate objects like a table? That He's recreating the table moment by moment on a daily basis. It says here the work of creation, and during the the 6 days of creation. It was different forms of life and the heavenly bodies. But I mean, how does that? Why should we project that on that daily creation, moment by moment recreation of the inanimate objects? Also, you didn't create the table.
Well, let's see.
Or the horses.
Let's take the very.
Life is being recreated.
Well, let's take the very first sentence of the Torah, of Genesis. If I take it the normal way, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's not life. Life comes in first on day 4. Even plant life doesn't come in until day 4. And earth there, Eretz, means dry land, because the next day it says he drew back the waters and dry land appeared, and he called the dry land Eretz. So Eretz means dry land. So he created the heavens, and he created the earth, and he created the waters, he created everything, even the inanimate world. It's just that, from our point of view, the inanimate world is not very interesting, so it gets a sentence or two and doesn't get a very elaborate description. But indeed, it created the inanimate world as well. And since the word Bereshis is used, so Maaseh Bereshis should include at least the very beginning of the Torah, which uses the word Bereshis. So I would assume, yeah.
If my body has no permanence, and there's not a causal relationship between my neshama and my body, why should I bother to elevate my body?
I'll just answer this programmatically. The physical is where God hides. The physical is what carries the illusion of permanence. The physical is what carries the illusion of cause and effect. That's where God hides. What we mean when we talk about elevating is revealing God where He's hidden. Revealing God where He's hidden. God hides in order for us to have free will. What I'm telling you now is the Das Tunas by the Ramchal, the Understanding Heart by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He hides in order for us to have free will, and the project we're supposed to attempt to achieve with our free will is to undo the hiding. The hiding is the whole project. It's the means by which it can be any project at all, because we need it for free will, and it's the definition of the project, which is to overcome or to reverse the process of hiding. As he points out, from a philosophical point of view, this makes a very satisfying system. It has one principle altogether. It has one principle altogether. Hiding and revealing what's hidden. That's the name of the entire system. Instead of having several different principles, which have to be independently understood and interact, you have one principle altogether. He hides, free will is possible, free will is used to overcome the hiding. That's the end of the entire story. Yeah.
Why must there be a what that is involved as well as a when?
I don't say there must be. I think that people feel that way. People naturally assume. For example, imagine you're in London, quite close to the Parliament building on the Thames, and there's a beautiful glass window, and somebody throws a heavy stone at the glass window, and the stone comes in contact with the window just at the moment of 1 o'clock when Big Ben bongs, and the window goes to smithereens, smashed, right? Now what do we say? The stone smashed the window. Big Ben didn't smash the window. The bonging of Big Ben didn't smash the window. But they both happened at the same time. The same moment that the stone came in contact with the window, Big Ben bombed. Right? So what do we mean when we say that it was the stone that did it and not the bomb? What's the difference between the stone and the bomb? Right? Don't tell me contact. You know very well that sound waves do reach objects. The sound waves from the bomb will reach the window also. You say that sound waves reach the window at the same time that the stone did. Right? So the intuitive feeling is, come on, you got to be joking. It's the stone that smashed the window. It pushed it in. It made it happen, you know. The Big Bang didn't make it happen. The intuitive picture is, look a little more closely, take it apart in its inner stuffing, analyze it microscopically, and you'll see the stone is making it go down, whereas the bong is not making it go down. That's the intuitive picture. According to Rabbi Dr, according to Hume, that whole picture is wrong. The right picture is this, because the bong is sounding every hour, and the glass has been sitting there for 62 years, and it hasn't broken. If the bong broke it, then the bong should have broken it 60 years ago. Shouldn't have been there for 60 years, surviving all those bongs, right? The stone is the only time the stone hit the window, and it broke. That's not look more closely into the stuffings of the event with a microscope and you see the difference. That's look more broadly into history and you'll see where the regularities are and where they are not. The regularities are with stones breaking windows. There are no regularities with bombs breaking windows. So you don't look more microscopically into the event. You look more macroscopically and globally into the patterns that you've experienced. That's the Humean point of view. And that's what Rabbi Dessler is talking about. You just know under what conditions it happens. Bonging conditions do not lead to broken windows. Stoning conditions do lead to broken windows. Why? Because my experience tells me that when you throw stones against windows, they break. And when you bong Big Ben, it doesn't break. Right? That's the difference. Okay, it's an introduction to nature and miracles.